The screaming started before I even reached the labor and delivery ward. It wasn't the usual sounds of childbirth, those guttural, primal cries that every obstetrician learns to interpret like a language. This was different, wrong, the kind of sound that makes your skin crawl and your instincts scream danger, even when you can't explain why. My name is Dr. Sarah Mackenzie, and I've been delivering babies for 15 years at Seattle General Hospital. I've seen everything, or so I thought. Breech presentations, cord prolapse, placental abruption, emergency C-sections in the middle of the night. I've held the hands of mothers who didn't make it and welcomed babies who fought tooth and nail to enter this world. Nothing surprises me anymore. At least that's what I believed until 2:17 a.m. on October 13th, 2023. The phone had jolted me from a restless sleep in the on-call room. Dr. Mackenzie, we need you in labor room 7 immediately, Nancy, the night nurse, had said. Her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before in our 12 years working together. It's complicated. I threw on my scrubs and rushed through the eerily quiet hospital corridors. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, probably needed maintenance again, casting intermittent shadows that seemed to follow me down the hall. As I approached the labor ward, that inhuman screaming grew louder, punctuated by voices I couldn't quite make out. What's the situation? I asked Nancy as I reached the nurse's station. She looked pale, her usually steady hands trembling, as she handed me the patient chart. Madison Rivers, 28 years old, 39 weeks gestation. First pregnancy. She came in about an hour ago in active labor, but... Nancy paused, glancing toward room 7. Her vitals are all over the place, Sarah. Temperature spiking to 104, then dropping to 96 within minutes. Heart rate jumping from 60 to 180, and the fetal monitor readings. What about them? You need to see for yourself. I opened Madison's chart as we walked toward the room, scanning the admission notes. Healthy pregnancy. No complications noted. During prenatal visits, no history of drug use or mental illness. Everything appeared textbook normal until tonight. The moment I stepped into room 7, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Madison Rivers lay on the delivery bed, her auburn hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her green eyes wide with terror. Not the fear of childbirth, but something deeper, more primal. Her husband Derek sat beside her, gripping her hand, his face ashen. Please, Madison gasped when she saw me, her voice hoarse from screaming. Something's wrong. This isn't normal. I'd heard variations of this from countless first-time mothers, but something in her tone made me pause. The desperation wasn't about pain. It was about knowing, somehow, that what was happening to her body defied explanation. I'm Dr. Mackenzie, I said, pulling on latex gloves and moving to examine her. I'm going to take a look and see what we're dealing with. As I approached the bed, the fetal monitor let out a sharp beep, followed by another, then another in rapid succession. The digital readout showed the baby's heart rate at a steady 140 beats per minute, completely normal. But as I watched, the number flickered, displaying 280 for a split second before returning to 140. Has anyone checked the equipment? I asked Nancy, who had followed me in. Twice. We even switched machines. Same readings. I positioned myself for the examination, but the moment my hands touched Madison's abdomen, she let out that inhuman scream again. The sound seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat, reverberating through the room like it was echoing off invisible walls. Madison, I need you to breathe with me, I said, trying to maintain my professional calm. In through your nose, out through your mouth. But as I palpated her belly, I felt something that made my blood run cold. The baby's position was wrong, not breech, not transverse, but shifting. Actually moving and repositioning itself as I examined her, as if it was actively avoiding my touch. Derek, I said, looking at her husband, can you tell me about the pregnancy? Any complications? Unusual symptoms? He shook his head, his eyes never leaving his wife's face. Everything was perfect. Textbook, the other doctors said. Madison felt great, all the tests came back normal. The only weird thing was... He hesitated. What? About a week ago, she started talking in her sleep, but not in English. I recorded some of it on my phone because I thought it was interesting. When I played it back to her, she didn't recognize it, said she's never studied any other languages. Madison's eyes suddenly rolled back, showing only the whites, and her body went rigid. The fetal monitor started screaming, not just beeping, but emitting a continuous ear-piercing alarm. The heart rate reading jumped to 250, then 300, numbers that should be impossible for a fetal heart. Get me an ultrasound machine now, I shouted to Nancy. As the nurse rushed out, Madison's body began to convulse, but these weren't seizure-like movements. Her abdomen was rippling, as if something large was moving just beneath her skin, stretching it to impossible limits. And then I heard it, a sound that still makes me wake up screaming 3 months later. It was another heartbeat, but it wasn't coming from the monitor. It was coming from inside the room, echoing around us like surround sound. A deep, rhythmic thumping that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Derek looked at me with pure terror in his eyes. Dr. Mackenzie, what's happening to my wife? I wish I could have given him an answer. In 15 years of practicing obstetrics, I'd never encountered anything even remotely similar. My medical training was failing me. Every textbook I'd ever memorized suddenly useless in the face of what I was witnessing. Madison's eyes snapped open, but they weren't her eyes anymore. They were completely black, not just the pupils but the entire visible portion, as if someone had filled them with ink. When she spoke, her voice was different, deeper, with an accent I couldn't place. "It knows you're here, doctor," she said, her lips curving into a smile that looked wrong on her face. "It's been waiting for you." Before I could respond, Madison's body went limp, her eyes returning to their normal green, confusion replacing the otherworldly awareness that had been there moments before. "What happened?" she whispered. "Why is everyone staring at me?" Nancy returned with the ultrasound machine, her hands shaking as she plugged it in. I grabbed the transducer and applied gel to Madison's abdomen, trying to get a clear picture of the baby's position and condition. What I saw on that screen changed everything I thought I knew about medicine, about pregnancy, about what was possible in this world. The baby appeared normal at first glance. Head down, proper size for gestational. Age, all limbs present and accounted for. But there was something else on the screen, a shadow that seemed to exist independently of the baby. It moved when the baby was still, and remained motionless when the baby shifted position. As I watched, transfixed, the shadow appeared to turn toward the ultrasound probe, as if it could see us watching. "Is everything okay with the baby?" Derek asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I stared at the screen, my medical degree feeling worthless in my hands. The shadow on the ultrasound seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, separate from both the baby's heartbeat and Madison's. As I watched, it began to take shape. Not human, but not entirely alien either. It looked almost like a second baby, but wrong somehow, with proportions that didn't quite fit. "Dr. Mackenzie?" Nancy's voice seemed to come from very far away. "The readings are spiking again." I looked up to see Madison watching me with those normal green eyes, but there was a knowledge in them now that hadn't been there before. She knew something was terribly wrong, just as I did. And in that moment of shared understanding, I realized that whatever was growing inside her wasn't just a baby, it was something else entirely. The next contraction hit Madison like a freight train, and with it came something that made my 15 years of medical training feel like a house of cards in a hurricane. As her body tensed, Madison began speaking in what sounded like Latin, but not quite. The cadence was wrong, the pronunciation too fluid, too ancient. "Venite ad me, fili tenebrarum," she whispered, her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Madison, do you know what you just said?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the ice forming in my chest, her face contorted in confusion. I've never studied Latin. I barely passed high school Spanish." She looked at Derek, who nodded confirmation, his face growing paler by the minute. I turned to the ultrasound screen again, adjusting the settings to get a clearer image. The shadow was still there, but now it seemed more defined, more purposeful, in its movements. As I watched, it appeared to reach toward the baby, not threatening, but almost protective, like it was embracing the child. "Nancy, I need you to run another blood panel," I said, never taking my eyes off the monitor. "Full talk screen, metabolic panel, and—" I paused, knowing how crazy this would sound. "Test for any unknown compounds or foreign substances." "Doctor," Derek interrupted, his voice shaking, "there's something else, about where we conceived." I looked up from the screen. "What about it?" "We were camping up near the old Cascade mining site. You know, the one they shut down in the 80s? Madison insisted on hiking there even though the locals told us to stay away. Said she felt drawn to the place." Madison's eyes widened. "I remember now. There was this cave, and the air inside was so cold even in July, but I felt like I needed to go in there. Like something was calling to me." Another contraction seized her, and this time the fetal monitor didn't just beep. It screamed, but it wasn't an alarm. It was harmonizing with Madison's cries, creating an otherworldly chorus that made the hair on my arms stand up. That's when I noticed something that should have been impossible. During the contraction, as Madison's cervix dilated, I could see something moving inside the birth canal that wasn't the baby's head. It was darker, more fluid, like liquid shadow given form. "Get Dr. Peterson down here now," I told Nancy. "And call the lab. I want those blood results stat." As the contraction ended, Madison grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Doctor, it's not trying to hurt the baby," she whispered urgently. "It's trying to protect it. From us." Before I could ask what she meant, the lights in the room flickered and went out completely, plunging us into darkness. In the silence that followed, I could hear 2 heartbeats echoing off the walls, but only one was human. If you're finding this as unsettling as I did that night, Please subscribe to hear how this impossible case unfolds. I promise you, what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about medicine and about what's possible in this world. Drop a comment below if you've ever encountered something that challenged everything you believed to be true. The emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that made Madison's pale skin look like porcelain stained with blood. But what terrified me most wasn't the darkness. It was the sudden, complete silence from the fetal monitor. Nancy, check the backup power to the monitors, I said, my voice barely steady. She fumbled with the equipment, but as soon as her hands touched the machine, it roared back to life. The readings were impossible. Fetal heart rate at 200 beats per minute, then dropping to 40, then spiking again. But the rhythm wasn't erratic. It was purposeful, almost like Morse code. Dr. James Peterson burst through the door, his gray hair disheveled from sleep. Sarah, what the hell is going? He stopped mid-sentence, staring at the monitor readings. That's not possible. Nothing about this case is possible, James, I muttered, turning back to Madison, who was gripping the bed rail so hard her knuckles had gone white. The contractions are changing, she gasped. It doesn't hurt anymore. It feels like something's helping me, guiding the baby. As if responding to her words, her cervix began dilating visibly. Not the gradual process every medical textbook describes, but rapid, controlled movement. Then, impossibly, it began to close again, as if something inside was preventing the birth. Madison, I need you to push with the next contraction, I instructed, positioning myself for delivery. I can't, she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. It won't let me. Every time I try to push, something pushes back. Derek leaned forward, taking her hand. Honey, what do you mean something pushes back? Before she could answer, Madison's body lifted completely off the bed, not sitting up, but levitating for 3 full seconds before settling back down. The restraints we'd loosely applied for safety snapped like paper. Jesus Christ, Peterson breathed, backing toward the door. James, don't you dare leave this room, I snapped. I need you here. Madison turned to look at me, but her head rotated too far, at an angle that should have broken her neck. When she spoke, her voice layered with harmonics that seemed to come from multiple throats. The child must not be born in your world yet, doctor. It needs more time to prepare for what's coming. Madison? Derek's voice cracked. Baby, what's happening to you? Her head snapped back to normal position, and she was herself again, confused and terrified. Derek, why are you all staring at me like that? The lights flickered again, and every electronic device in the room, monitors, IV pumps, even my pager, began emitting the same low-frequency hum. The sound seemed to resonate in my chest cavity, making my heart skip beats to match its rhythm. That's when I noticed the ultrasound screen was still on, displaying something that made my blood freeze. The shadow wasn't just embracing the baby anymore. It was changing the child, reshaping it from the inside out. And whatever it was creating didn't look entirely human. James, pull up the hospital archives, I said, never taking my eyes off the ultrasound. Search for any cases involving the Cascade mining site, pregnancies, births, anything unusual. Peterson's fingers flew across the computer keyboard while Madison lay eerily still, her breathing too shallow, too controlled. The baby, or whatever, it was becoming, seemed to be waiting, watching through the ultrasound as we searched for answers. Sarah, James whispered, his face pale in the monitor's glow. I found something. 3 cases, all in 1987. 3 women, all conceived near the mining site. All died during delivery. My stomach dropped. What happened to the babies? That's the thing. There's no record of any surviving infants. But look at this. He turned the screen toward me. Each woman exhibited identical symptoms. Temperature, fluctuations, speaking in unknown languages, fetal heart rate anomalies, and in each case, the attending physician noted unexplained shadows on ultrasound imaging. Madison's eyes snapped open, but she wasn't looking at us. She was staring at the ceiling, carrying on a conversation with something none of us could see. Yes, I understand, she whispered. They need to know the truth, about what you really are. Madison, who are you talking to? Derek asked, his voice breaking. She turned to him with a sad smile. Our baby isn't just our baby anymore, Derek. It's something much older, much more important. The mining site wasn't abandoned because it ran out of ore. It was sealed because they found something that should have stayed buried. The ultrasound screen flickered, and for a moment I saw not one shadow but dozens, writhing and coalescing around the child like a protective cocoon made of living darkness. The radiation didn't create this, Madison continued, her voice growing stronger. It just woke it up, and now it needs to be born, but not in the way you think. Not into your world, into something between worlds. If you're still following this terrifying case, please hit that subscribe button because what happened next will shake you to your core. Leave a comment about your most unexplainable medical experience. I'm starting to believe that medicine can't explain everything we encounter in this world. The shadows on the ultrasound suddenly moved as one, rushing toward the surface of Madison's belly, and I knew with horrible certainty that the real delivery was about to begin. The shadows beneath Madison's skin began moving with purpose, creating ripples across her abdomen like something massive, swimming just below the surface. Her cervix dilated completely in seconds, a process that should take hours compressed into heartbeats. "This is it," Madison whispered, her voice layered with harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "It's ready." I positioned myself at the foot of the bed, my hands trembling despite 15 years of experience. James stood behind me, his breathing rapid and shallow. Nancy had backed against the wall, her face ashen but her professional instincts keeping her in the room. "Madison, with the next contraction, I need you to—" I began, but she cut me off. "No, doctor, you don't understand. I won't be pushing. It will come when it's ready, and it will choose how to be born." Derek gripped her hand tighter. "Honey, what do you mean it will choose?" Before she could answer, her body arched impossibly, lifting completely off the bed as if pulled by invisible strings. The monitors went haywire, not just beeping, but screaming in frequencies that made my teeth ache. The fetal heart rate display showed numbers that climbed beyond what any human heart could sustain: 300, 400, 500 beats per minute. Then, silence. Complete, absolute silence that seemed to swallow sound itself. The monitors flatlined, both mother and baby. But Madison's eyes remained open, alert, watching me with an awareness that belonged to something far older than a 28-year-old teacher from Seattle. "It's beginning," she said, her voice the only sound in the room. The temperature plummeted so quickly I could see my breath. Frost began forming on the windows despite the October warmth outside. The fluorescent lights flickered between normal white and something that looked almost purple, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. Madison's body slowly lowered back, onto the bed, but the bulge of her pregnancy had changed shape entirely. Instead of the natural curve of a baby in position for birth, her abdomen undulated with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. "James," I whispered, "are you recording this?" "The cameras died 10 minutes ago," he replied, his voice barely audible. "All of them, even the backup systems." That's when I saw the crowning, but it wasn't a baby's head emerging. It was darkness itself, given form and substance. The birth canal stretched impossibly wide, accommodating something that existed partially in our reality and partially somewhere else entirely. "Oh God," Nancy breathed from across the room. "What is that? This lie?" Darkness pulsed, and within it I caught glimpses of the actual baby. Normal, human, perfect. But it was encased, protected, or perhaps transformed by this writhing shadow that seemed to exist in the spaces between molecules. Madison's face contorted, not with pain, but with concentration, as if she was communicating with whatever was being born through her. It says it's been waiting so long to return. The mining site was just one doorway. There are others, all over the world, places where the boundaries are thin." "Return from where?" Derek asked, his voice cracking. "From the spaces between," Madison replied, her eyes now completely black. "The places where thoughts become real and nightmares learn to breathe." The entity, because I could no longer think of it as simply a baby, continued its emergence. As more of it became visible, I realized it existed in a constant state of flux, never quite solid, never quite ethereal. It was adapting to our reality in real time, learning the rules of existence in our dimension. "Doctor," Madison said, turning, those ink-black eyes toward me. "You need to understand something crucial. This child, our child, it's not here to harm anyone. It's here to prepare." "Prepare for what?" "For what's coming through the other doorways, the ones that will open whether we want them to or not." The delivery reached its climax as the entity fully emerged, and I found myself holding something that defied every category my mind tried to assign it. It was a baby, perfect, beautiful, human, but it was also something else entirely, something that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The moment I touched it, images flooded my mind. I saw the Cascade mining site as it truly was, not a place where humans had dug for ore, but where something ancient had been accidentally disturbed. I saw the three women from 1987, each carrying similar entities, each dying because they couldn't handle the strain of bridging two realities. But Madison was different, stronger, chosen. The baby, the entity, opened its eyes and they held the eye. Wisdom of something that had existed since before time had meaning. When it looked at me, I felt exposed, as if it could see not just my physical form, but every decision I'd ever made, every fear I'd ever harbored. "It's beautiful," Derek whispered, and I realized he was right. despite everything impossible about what I was holding, there was an undeniable beauty to it. A perfection that transcended our understanding of what perfection could be. Madison's body began to stabilize, her vital signs returning to normal ranges, though the monitors still displayed readings that flickered between impossible numbers and baseline human parameters. The shadows in the room retreated, not disappearing but pulling back to give us space. "Madison," I said softly, "how do you feel?" She smiled, her eyes returning to their normal green, though they now held depths that hadn't been there before. "Empty," she said, "but not in a bad way, like I was a vessel for something that needed to cross over, and now that purpose is fulfilled." I looked down at the baby in my arms. It was breathing normally, its skin pink and healthy, but its eyes held intelligence that no newborn should possess. It was studying me, learning from me, understanding me in ways that made my skin crawl and my heart sing simultaneously. "What do we tell the others?" James asked, his voice hoarse. "How do we document this?" Before I could answer, the baby made its first sound, not a cry, but something that sounded almost like words in a language I couldn't identify but somehow understood. It was saying hello. That's when I noticed Derek had gone completely silent, staring at his child with an expression I couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same harmonic layering that Madison's had exhibited. "We don't tell anyone anything," he said, reaching for the baby. "Some knowledge isn't meant to be shared. Some doorways need guardians, not scientists." As I placed the entity child in its father's arms, I realized that whatever had been born that night wasn't just a baby. It was the beginning of something much larger, much more significant than any single birth. And I had helped bring it into our world. The question that would haunt me for months to come was simple. Had I helped save humanity, or had I just delivered its replacement? If you're still with me after this impossible delivery, please subscribe. And share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed something that science couldn't explain? Because I'm beginning to understand that the boundaries between possible and impossible are far thinner than we like to believe. 6 months later, I sit in my home office in Bellevue, staring at a resignation letter I've rewritten 17 times. The words never seem adequate to explain why Dr. Sarah Mackenzie, one of Seattle General's most experienced obstetricians, can no longer bear to deliver babies. How do you tell the medical board that you've lost faith in the fundamental nature of reality? The nightmares started 3 days after the delivery. Not the usual stress dreams that come with difficult cases, but vivid, lucid experiences where I'm back in that room, holding something that shifts between human infant and writhing shadow. In these dreams, the baby speaks to me in that harmonic voice, telling me about the other doorways, the other guardians being born around the world. "You did well, doctor," it says with Derek's eyes and Madison's smile. "But your part isn't finished." I always wake up with frost on my bedroom windows, even in March. The official medical record lists Madison Rivers as a normal delivery with minor complications due to equipment malfunction. James and I agreed on that version, though we both know it's a lie that tastes like ash every time we speak. Nancy requested a transfer to pediatrics the next week and hasn't spoken to me since. But the lies are easier than the truth. 3 days after the birth, Derek Rivers called the hospital to say they were taking the baby to visit family out of state. They never returned. No forwarding address, no insurance claims, no trace of them in any database I can access. It's as if the Rivers family simply ceased to exist the moment they left Seattle General. Except for the reports, I've become obsessed with tracking unusual births, scouring medical journals and news reports for cases that echo what I witnessed. What I've found terrifies me more than that night in Labor Room 7. A baby born in Portland whose heartbeat could be heard through walls. Twins delivered in Vancouver who spoke in perfect synchronization from the moment of birth. A child in Spokane, whose umbilical cord pulsed with light that showed up on hospital security cameras, all near old mining sites. All involving parents who had camped or hiked in areas locals avoid. The pattern is spreading. I hired a private investigator to look into the Cascade mining site. What he found in the archived geological surveys made my blood run cold. The site wasn't closed due to contamination. It was sealed because the miners had broken through into something that predated human civilization, something that had been waiting. The radiation readings were fabricated to keep people away from the real truth, that there are places on Earth where reality is thin, where things that exist between dimensions can slip through if given the right conditions. A human pregnancy, with its profound biological and emotional energy, provides the perfect conduit. I've driven up to the Cascade site twice, telling myself I'm just conducting research. Both times, I've turned back before reaching the sealed entrance. Not because of fear, but because of the pull I feel when I get close. The same magnetic draw that Madison described. Part of me wants to go into that cave, to understand what's really happening to our world. That's what scares me most. Not the entity I helped deliver, but my own growing desire to seek out more of them. Last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a beautiful baby with eyes that held too much intelligence, sitting in Derek's lap. On the back, someone had written, "Thank you for helping us cross over. The other guardians send their regards." Below that, in different handwriting, Madison's handwriting, was an address in Alaska and a single line, "When you're ready to understand your true purpose, we'll be waiting." I burned the photograph, but I memorized the address. The medical community has no framework for what I experienced. Colleagues I've cautiously approached with hypothetical scenarios dismiss them as stress-induced hallucinations or elaborate hoaxes. The rational part of my mind agrees with them. It would be so much easier to believe I had a breakdown, that none of it really happened. But the frost on my windows tells a different story. So do the reports of unusual births that continue to surface, each one following the same pattern, each one producing children who develop far too quickly and demonstrate abilities that shouldn't exist. Yesterday, I made a decision that will probably destroy what's left of my career. I'm going public with this story, starting with this account. Not because I expect people to believe me, but because there are others out there, medical professionals, researchers, parents, who have encountered the impossible and need to know they're not losing their minds. The children born from these encounters aren't abominations or threats. They're something new, something necessary for what's coming. The entities, the guardians, seem to understand that our reality is changing, that the barriers between dimensions are weakening whether we acknowledge it or not. I think about Madison's words often. Some doorways need guardians, not scientists. Maybe that's what I've become. Not a doctor anymore, but a guardian of knowledge that exists in the spaces between medical textbooks and scientific journals. A witness to the birth of something that challenges everything we think we know about life, consciousness, and the nature of existence itself. 3 months ago, I started having new dreams. Not nightmares this time, but visions of a future where children like the one I delivered work alongside humanity to navigate whatever cosmic shift is approaching. In these dreams, I'm older, no longer practicing medicine, but teaching, preparing other healthcare workers for deliveries that will redefine what we consider normal. I don't know if these visions are prophetic or just my mind trying to find meaning in trauma, but I've stopped trying to return to my old life. That Sarah Mackenzie, the one who believed reality had clearly defined boundaries, died in Labor Room 7 on October 13th, 2023. The woman typing, "This is someone new, someone who understands that our universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any medical textbook could describe." Tonight, I'm driving to Alaska. If you've made it this far in my account, please subscribe to this channel and share this story with anyone in the medical field who might need to hear it. Leave a comment if you've had your own encounter with the impossible. You're not alone, and you're not crazy. The world is changing, one impossible birth at a time, and we need to be ready, because they're not just babies anymore. They're doorways, and something magnificent is coming through.